Hi guys, hello everyone. Hi. We're here today with a very special guest. I have a huge honor to present you Nrsimhananda Prabhu, who is a Krishna devotee, direct student of Shrila Prabhupada, and his follower for many years. I present you very wise and very spiritual man, Nrsimhananda. Nrsimhananda, thank you so much for joining this morning in this beautiful paradisic place that you have here. To start with, like what everyone usually, as soon as they hear that you met Srila Prabhupada, that you've been his follower, the first question always how he was. Was it like a strike of lightning? Was his, did you feel something unhuman? Was he like a god, or he was just a normal man? What was your reaction first time you saw him?
Of course, I didn't meet Srila Prabhupada before having come in contact with his literatures. So it was many months before I actually met him. At that time, 1971, there was already at least 1,000 devotees at that time.
Oh, wow.
So
where it was?
I'll explain. So Prabhupada was, of course, traveling constantly, spreading Krishna consciousness. And those of us that were fortunate enough to understand the profound nature of the message he was carrying were joining various small temples that weren't temples, they were apartments. They were just 2-3 devotees. So when I first met the devotees, it was in Chicago, and it was a small apartment in a rundown, dilapidated part of the city. And I later went on from there to New Vrindavan, which was a very small farmhouse in a remote area of West Virginia that was at the end of a muddy dirt road that you had to mainly walk, couldn't drive. So in those days we felt quite, isolated in many ways because there were so few of us. And I thought, my God, I've just lost the opportunity in life at such a young age to have any friends. Oh. And but the goal was worth it because I understood from Prabhupada having reached into my heart from the words out of his writings that the purpose of life was much different than what I'd understood prior to having heard from him. So the instructions became his entry into my consciousness. I began to know him not by meeting him, but by understanding his nature, the nature of his delivery of the great knowledge that had been so far had been escaped me in life.
Was it some kind of like a magazine? I assume that the Bhagavad Gita at this point wasn't published, right, with his comments?
No, the Bhagavad Gita in what we call the purple edition, it was an abridged edition, had been published in 1968. It was without the Sanskrit.
Right.
The Macmillan edition, which was fully unabridged with all of the Sanskrit and word by word, was published in 1972, a year after I was joining the movement.
Right.
But it was enough to... There was enough literatures. The Krishna book, the Nectar of Instruction, the unabridged Gita, a couple of small books, Easy Journey to Other Planets. These were available to us, but really the flagship of our movement at that time was the Back to Godhead magazine. And I received that from a devotee in London just prior to my having finished my studies there and taking a flight back to Chicago after 2 years.
Were you religious before, or it just like came out of no prepare, your soul yourself wasn't prepared to receive it. And like a lot of people, for example, they on a spiritual journey for very early age, and they're going from one religion to another religion, they're studying stuff. How was it for you? Were you a religious person before?
No, I was actually agnostic. I had actually come to the conclusion that I was God.
Oh my.
Yeah. So I had fallen, from the point of view of the spiritual knowledge, the gyan of spiritual life, I'd fallen to the lowest possible point.
Oh wow. So you got these articles that were like talking to you, and then you decided to follow Srila Prabhupada?
Well, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So when I was handed that magazine, it happened to be a beautiful picture, painting of Krishna on the cover. And I was in the Tottenham Court Road station in London, walking to my school to get my diploma, which was from the film school. So I was looking at, I was feeling generous in the last days of my stay after 2 years, and I just thought I'd give this beggar, this one young woman, some shillings, and I took the magazine. And then I was contemplating what it said back to Godhead. Godhead is light, nescience is darkness. Where there is light, there's the darkness. And as I was contemplating that, I was walking up the steps, came to the street, and almost stepped into the street when a double-decker bus was going by. And I stepped back because I had been so absorbed in looking at this, meditating on this beautiful painting, Krishna. And there was a sign on the bus for an advertisement, and it said, "In your head, you know it's right."
Oh wow. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
So then I went to wow. And so then when I went to the school a few blocks away, I was looking for the principal, and she happened to be carrying my diploma in her hand, oddly enough. And she said, "Oh, David, here's your diploma from the School of Illusion."
Right.
It's like, what's that about?
She said that?
Yeah.
School of the Illusion?
School of Illusion.
Oh my God.
She handed me my diploma. And I went on to the charter office where, at that time, that's how we got cheap flights, through charter flights, and I bought a ticket. I was going to pick it up. It was a small little place on the second floor of a building near Soho. And the manager in the back saw me in the front desk and called me, "Come in." Okay. He sat me down, and he said to me, he said, "When I was your age, I had an opportunity to take up real spiritual life, but I didn't do it. Would you like to go to lunch?"
Wow. How old are you at this time?
I'm 23.
Mm-hmm.
So I had become a vegetarian by that time myself. I was doing hatha yoga, and so I said, "I'm a vegetarian." He said, "No problem." So he took me to a vegetarian restaurant. He shared his experience for some reason, paid for lunch. And the next 2 days that I was remaining in London, I tried calling the number that was in that magazine of the temple in Bury Place, but nobody answered. Kind of a common occurrence.
Mm-hmm.
And those days were quite full of synchronous events that kind of would not be normal. And I was happy to finally get on the plane, to get out of this kind of alt reality that I was in. And I sat in a seat next to the window. This very large woman had the middle seat, and she started preaching to me about Jesus. And the whole way back, she was giving me this, trying to convert me to become a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I was so relieved to get off the plane. And I came to the O'Hare Airport, which of course later on we called O'Hare Airport, because
Hurry.
Yeah, because we distributed so many books there for many years in the airport. And my sister was supposed to pick me up. And so it was a sunny, warm spring afternoon, and everybody was catching their rides, and pretty soon I was the one person left standing all alone in a very quiet, airport. And I realized that my sisters had forgotten. Those days we didn't have cell phones. Mm-hmm. So I just realized I would take the bus back. And as I was standing there, a girl kind of appeared out of nowhere, a young girl, and she said, "Do you need a ride?" And I said, I explained everything to her, because you have to understand, in the early 70s, that was the mood. You just poured out your thoughts, unedited.
Wow.
That's what we did. As the counter culture generation, kind of, you just shared what's going on in your life. And when I mentioned that, I said, if my sister had come, I was going to go to this address where there's these Hare Krishnas, because I'm so interested. I was so, curious about it. But since she didn't pick me up, it means, because everything had to have a meaning, it means I'm not supposed to go there, so I'm just going to go home. And frankly, I was very relieved, because I'd had enough of this religious stuff for the last 3 days.
Yeah, of course. Everyone was trying to convert you somewhere all of a sudden.
Oh, my God. So she says to me, you have to understand, in high school, and I was never a ladies' man or anything. So girls never would walk up to me and say anything. Right. I would be afraid to talk to them. It was like that. So this was an unusual occurrence, that some girl had walked up to me and asked me if I needed a ride.
Right.
And so I said to her, so she said to me, "Oh, Hare Krishnas, I've always been interested in them. You wait right here. I'll get my car. We'll go together."
Wow.
I said, "Where do you live?" So she told me what town she lived in the area, and it was like 40 miles the other direction. I said, "Oh, that's way out of your way. It's no problem. I can take the bus and get off right in front of the building that my mother lives in. So it's not a problem for me." So she said, no, you wait right here. So she goes to get her car, and I'm thinking, I hope that bus comes before she comes back.
Oh, my. Hoping to escape? Easy escape?
Yeah, I'm just like, oh, my God, I can't do this. But she comes, and sure enough, we drive, and I have these two big trunks of being in London for 2 years. All my belongings I'm bringing back. So everything I own is in the car, her car. And we're driving to this address, and the neighborhood gets more and more unsavory and, poor and dangerous. And we finally arrive at this building, and I'm thinking, I can't leave my stuff in the car. It could get easily broken into and stolen. So I said, "Listen, we're going to have to bring my things with us."
Oh, my God.
We lugged these two trunks to the second floor of this kind of brownstone building. Finally knock on the door. It's around 7 o'clock at night by this time. And this Mataji opens the door, and just a ton of incense billows out. Just poof, we're enveloped in a fog of incense, which is startling, to say the least. And we drag the trunks in and come in, and the girl says, "Listen, you're just in time. We're having a lecture on the Bhagavad Gita. Come sit," So they go into was the living room of this small apartment, and there's this guy dressed in robes and everything, and he's sitting there. He's talking from the Gita, and he's talking from the second chapter. We sit down and saying that never was a time that I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future will there be a time we do not exist. The soul's eternal, undying, primeval. He started going on, but the simplest stuff. But it was said so clearly by Srila Prabhupada, and then he, pontificated on the information. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, this is just, why didn't my parents tell me this? Why am I learning this so late in life?
Exactly the same feeling I had when I was reading that. I was like, why it's no one's talking? It should be given at school when you just start reading. It should be one of the first books to read. This is the base. This is like, after you can figure out what you're going to do with that, but it should be given like that to you. World will be a different place.
So I was just absorbed. And then he finishes up, and it's, about an hour later or so, and there's these deities that I didn't know what a deity was. I saw it was Jagannath, Balaram, Subhadra, and I had no idea what these dolls were.
Right.
But they were, intriguing, and it was all very mystical. And remember, it was 1971. It was the time of Tim Leary and LSD and Haight-Ashbury and San Francisco and concerts where, and the Beatles and George Harrison, and
right.
It was just like it was a very imaginative, creative period. So then they serve, this girl brings out this hot milk which has pieces of bananas floating in it and steaming, and she calls it something, I don't know, she's this prasadam. Mm-hmm. And she gives it, I drink this milk. This is the best milk I've ever had. I've never tasted such nectar as that milk.
Wow.
I'll never forget. To this day, I love cooking milk with bananas and sugar, and oh my God, it's just like so great. And so it gets around 9 o'clock now, and I haven't talked to my mother. I haven't said where I am, my sisters, nothing. I'm just been absorbed in this thing. And the girl said, well, I got to go. I said, wait a minute, I need to go back to my house. She said, no, I have to go home. So the guy who was giving the lecture, he said to me, well, you're here, you have all your stuff, why don't you stay the night? And join us in our program in the morning. So I said, okay, that sounds better than going out into that dangerous neighborhood.
And walking.
Lugging on my truck's back.
For how long, you don't know.
So I said, okay. So she leaves. I never got her name, never saw her again.
Oh my God.
And I just ended up staying and becoming a devotee. It was like, it's not that I didn't go home to see my mother, but
yeah. Eventually, you did.
This became my new life.
Mm-hmm. And at this point, it was more about distributing books and talking to people on the streets about Krishna consciousness. That's how it was.
Our days were very simple. We did our morning program. Then, we got up early, we did our morning program, we made the prasadam, we honored the prasadam, we cleaned up, then we went out down to State and Madison, in the downtown Chicago, which at that time was called the busiest corner in the world. So many people all the time.
Oh, wow.
And we chanted for 6 to 8 hours. And we also, besides chanting, we were. You okay?
Yeah, okay.
We were going door to door, distributing Back to Godhead magazines. We didn't really have very books in those days. We had mainly what we wanted to do was deliver the magazines, and if they were interested, then we would hope that they would take a book. But book distribution hadn't become the habit at that time so much. And so sometimes we would go to just neighborhoods and go door to door and knock on doors in our dhotis and tilak and everything. And then on Sundays we had our feast, the Krishna Love Feast. And the Krishna Love Feast it was not easy for us. We didn't have any money. Right. So on Saturdays we would go dumpster diving.
Oh my God.
And we would go in back of these supermarkets. They'd throw away all this produce, which much of it was very good. and we'd rescue it, and it would end up, being offered to Krishna, and we would have these grand feasts. That was
God.
You never knew what it was going to be each week, but we were very much in the mood of sabji, pakora, halava, sweet rice, nectar, chutney. That's what you did for the feast. It wasn't tortillas, or it wasn't Russian salad. It was what Prabhupada had
real
established.
Vedic food.
Well, that's not even real Vedic food. I would call it real Prabhupada cuisine. I mean, you can't say it's Vedic food. Tomatoes didn't make it to India until the 16th or 17th century. I mean,
of course.
potatoes were not used in Vedic cuisine. There were a lot of things that Prabhupada liked and that we did. I think it's a misconception of what it means to be Vedic.
Right.
I mean, that's.
Yeah, it's a big mix by now. It's between Indian food and all other yogis, discovery, whatever. Each yogic school will invent their own cuisine, and they will call it that it comes out from Vedic school. So by now, Vedic cuisine is something very large and vague at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that Prabhupada, he was an expert cook. He taught us how to cook, how to use spices. He was an apothecarian. He ran a business as a pharmaceutical business, so he understood what
About
things
nutrition.
to put into food for nutrition. And he was an extraordinary personality even in a material sense. His business was hugely successful in the 1930s. His wife, he bought his wife a car. Under British rule, his wife had a car, and it wasn't that was not a commonality amongst very many Indians. They succeeded to that level. And then many years later, he had the spiritual acumen to recognize that Krishna was so kind to have taken it all away. This is the sign of a real, because the higher you rise in power and prestige,
more you hanging to that.
the more you become attached to it. That's why wealthy people become generally more stingy. You can always, when you go to a wealthy person, if they give you a few $1,000s, it's nothing compared to if a poor person gives you, $20.
Yeah.
They're giving a much greater percentage of their assets and wealth.
Absolutely.
So, as their saying goes, Krishna doesn't look at what you give. He sees what you keep.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
So anyway, I spent some time in Chicago, and then I was looking for a little more peaceful environment, and I had heard about New Vrindavan, where all the crazies go. Although there was only 3 or 4 people there, 5 people. And I was always attracted to nature, so I took off for New Vrindavan. And when I was in New Vrindavan, I was put in charge of the garden. I'd never grown a thing in my life, so that was unique.
Experience. I can imagine.
Especially since we were depending on the garden for our Sunday feast, which maybe had 1 or 2 guests if we were lucky. But that was a unique experience. And I was, when Prabhupada came to Detroit, Kirtanananda, who was the head of New Vrindavan at the time, had started it, and Hari Griva, who was editing the Macmillan edition of the Bhagavad Gita at that time, wanted to drive up to see Prabhupada when he came to Detroit, which was only about a 4 or 5 hour drive. So I went with them, and the 3 of us drove to Detroit, 1971. So Detroit would be the first time that I would actually physically be in the. So at the airport, many devotees came in from different places: Toronto, Chicago, Cleveland, all different places, because they also, many of them, had not met Srila Prabhupada. misconception that the Prabhupada disciples as direct disciples necessarily had much association, physical association with His divine grace. In fact, if you were initiated in 1977 or 76, you might not have seen him physically. Wow. So that's why the whole concept of the Prabhupada disciple and the proximity to Prabhupada, we know today the vast majority of Prabhupada disciples know him much better than we did then because of all the memory series, the books and videos, remembrances. Those provide for, and now the letters that we have, all these provide a profound and deep look into who Prabhupada was being while he was here. We didn't have access to that. You all have access to the same things we do. We all basically have the same access to Srila Prabhupada. There's no advantage being his direct disciple by any kind of rule of spiritual life. It's just, it's the parampara is transparent. And you know, that'll bring up a lot of questions. Well, if it's transparent and your guru's a Kanishta Adhikari, how does that work? Do you take shelter of the shiksha, of the acharyas who are acknowledged to be pure? You know, these discussions, unfortunately, have not been resolved in 50 years and 40 years since Prabhupada left. And it's really, I think, caused a lot of consternation and suffering amongst the devotees because you're kind of left to figure it out for yourself, but that's also part of the plan. Let us not shirk our responsibilities as aspiring chelas of the divine couple. That, you know, it's not going to be an easy road. In any case, you have to do the work.
Also yourself, of course.
You've got to pray for the mercy, and there's a certain amount of carnage, spiritual carnage that comes. I mean, even when Lord Ram was present, the yogis in the forest were being attacked and killed, murdered by the demons. So all these things are going on simultaneously. It's extremely confusing, and it's amazing that anybody makes it through to actually take up the sadhana bhakti that we're going to have. So anyway, so here we are in Detroit. Prabhupada is getting off the plane, comes down the jetway. There's a whole, that time, of course, there's no security, so that the entire lounge is packed with bald heads and flowing saris and kirtan, and as soon as you see him, everybody in that lounge, all the devotees, began to cry.
Oh my God.
Everybody. Now, don't take it from me. Ask Indrajuna Swami. He was there at the time. He wasn't a Swami. He was Indrajuna. It was an amazing moment that when we feasted our eyes upon this pure devotee, just the darshan went so deep that we were brought to tears of relief, tears of joy, tears of gratitude. I couldn't stop crying for a couple hours.
Oh my God.
And Prabhupada, the first thing he says to everybody, which then created a second wave of this crying, was when he stood and sat in front of the devotees in the lounge, because in those days we could do that. First thing he says was, Aham Brahmasmi, you are not this body. And that just like was an undulation throughout all the devotees sitting there of a sense of deep realization. And I don't know what else he said, and that I'd have to go back and listen to it. But then we went back to the temple, and Prabhupada gave a lecture there, and we had kirtan and prasadam, and that was my introduction to the vapu, the physical form of Srila Prabhupada, that I knew then, and most deeply then, that I was in the hands of someone who really had come back to save me. Now, there's many years have passed. You think, what does that mean? Is that particular soul has come back? as it's some places it's stated, or is it the representative that's come back? Hard to say. I don't have the answer to that. I don't think anybody. I mean, people can do the quote wars. You can quote this and quote that, but ultimately everything has to come down to your heart. It's not gyan, it's not knowledge. It's vigyan. It's realized knowledge, and only you know what that is. Nobody can tell you. No GBC, no sannyasi, no, apparently advanced person. Only you can actually imbibe what is true, because you're the soul and your consciousness, and it's you that's at stake. No one's gonna fly off with you at the time of death.
Save you, or yeah, absolutely. It's your homework. It's your path.
Yeah.
You're the one who has to take it.
And Prabhupada was very clear that he liked the idea of people using their intelligence to discern what is matter, what is spirit. He really gave a lot of responsibility to the men and the women around him that were self-starters, that were doers, that understood how to get things done. He was a very practical man, and we've discovered that in a way that we didn't know at the time through all these recounts of Prabhupada's actions with people and how he was so individual with people. And sometimes one of my favorite things is when Prabhupada mentioned one time about women. He says, yes, of all women, he was talking to some devotees, of all women, the Jewish women are the most beautiful. But then when he was in France, he was also asked the question, he said, yes, of all women, the French women, they're the most beautiful. Prabhupada had a way of charming, and you didn't know when he was kind of sometimes, the joke was on us,
right,
and he was enjoying it or not.
Absolutely.
He's a very deep person, much deeper than I even began to understand in the beginning.
Thank you so much, Nrsimhananda. We're going to continue in our next series of interviews, and stay tuned. Thank you.